Uh, Welcome everyone to our first LinkedIn Live with Miss Linda Ong, and we're here today talking about influencers, the impact of influencers today in 2022. And I am so thrilled that Linda's joining us to have this really colorful conversation, as so many folks that we talk to, and I'm sure you talk to, are have a really robust influencer strategy. So before we get into all the goods, I'd love you to just talk about who you are. Who's Linda Ong?
Linda Ong is the CEO and founder of Cultique, and I would say that I'm someone who follows my passions, which are learning about culture and gaining empathy for people who don't think like me and helping brands understand audiences on their own terms.
That's incredible. And you work in several different industries, so you
We work primarily in entertainment and media, but we also have been working in travel and tech and retail.
And it all boils down to culture, which is like pinnacle.
Well, culture is a power tool now. Culture is a competitive advantage and a differentiator for any brand who wants to be relevant, right? And when I started working in culture in 2008, no one had any idea what I was doing. People asked me if I was working in yogurt. But no, in 2016, it became officially the word of the year. And, you know, I really look at culture as an ecosystem of ideas. It's sort of how we process things that happen in the world. And, you know, every culture can have its own map. And so what we really try to do is understand an audience on its own terms and helping brands understand how to speak with them, not at them. And, you know, today we're in a world where the consumer is in control, and the consumer has a multitude of choices, millions, and sometimes an infinite amount of choices. And so brands have to work really hard to get consumers' attention.
And so when we think about our topic today, influencers, and I mean, you and I are old enough to know we were there from the beginning. We were there from the beginning. Influencers came into fruition.
Right.
What's changed? What's changed about 2022 and influencers in your perspective, in your mind, in your work? What's a bit different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the most fundamental shift that's happened since the beginning of influencer culture has been generational. That influencer culture grew up as a product and a creation of a millennial generation that understood how social media could really help not only further their ideas and their conversations, but even create and further their careers. And so what you have now is, you know, millennials sort of on the low end. The younger end of millennials are in their late 20s, right? Gen Z on the high end is in their early 20s. And you're seeing a huge shift in tastes and appetites, and even in perceptions of what's authentic, what's credible, what's trustworthy. And you have Gen Z who've grown up as digital natives who have understood since early childhood, many of their siblings or, you know, role models were millennial influencers, and they understand the business model behind that activity. And then on top of that, TikTok has become the Gen Z platform of choice, where you know, it's less polished, it's less perfect, and you even see Instagram's popularity waning among younger audiences. So I think we're seeing you know, it used to be the generations were considered to happen in 25-year stretches. But there are some sharp distinctions that we're seeing, along with commonalities, but I think for marketers, especially understanding the distinctions between millennials and Gen Z is really, really critical. And I think, again, when it comes down to who's speaking on behalf of a brand, that distinction is really sharp.
Right. And when marketers, and there will be so many watching this that have active influencer strategies at play in the marketplace, you know, things have obviously shifted from even last year to this year. And I mean, we've done our own research here at StoryTap, and, you know, what came back were 52% of marketers were thinking about using their customers to influence others. I wondered if you could just spend a bit of time on, like, why customers, what makes sense about that generational lens, that culture lens about customers in today's world, and how that could impact results, the brand at large.
Yeah, well, I think in a world of infinite choices, the the question really comes down to what is really authentic and what is authenticity in an environment that's highly mediated. And, there's a lot of understanding that brands pay people to speak on their behalf. So I think you also have that happening at the same time when we have this huge inflection point in culture where a lot of people, including a lot of younger generations, really don't trust old structures or older structures, because we're really at this inflection point where everything's crumbled and anything can happen, right? And anybody can succeed. There's no rules that you have to live by or win by in order to make money or be successful. And so in that world, what's happened is culture, society at large doesn't really trust the government or large institutions and establishments like Wall Street or even real estate anymore, as much as really one-on-one real people, and even see that the power of a recommendation from a friend or family member has always been, that's not a new thing, has always been more trusted because there's a sense of either lived experience or, no other agendas. And so when you have in this world where we don't really trust big institutions, and even more so during the pandemic, where brands had to step in for the failings of government, and brands were the ones that were encouraging people to safe and healthy COVID, protective behaviors, and brands were coming in and taking care of their employees. And, the values of a brand were as important, and this happened before the pandemic, but the pandemic, as it did with so many things, accelerated the move towards, people really being attracted to brands for the values that they stood for and the values that they upheld. And so making, increasingly, and again, very much fueled by younger generations, people making choices on buying decisions based on the brand's values. So when you have customers who are finding brands because of like-minded values, then for people who are other consumers who are not yet customers to hear directly from that customer what their lived experience is with that brand, it feels more authentic to them than someone who may have been paid either, a celebrity spokesperson or an influencer or somebody else who they don't know, but someone who seems like a peer who has actually tried the product, who is willing to criticize it as well as say what they like about it, feels more believable and more trustworthy because there's this belief that they wouldn't speak out unless they really believed in the product and the brand.
That's incredible. You're kind of, when you think about adding that lens to it, it kind of blows up the model a little bit. And it's scary, I think, in general. I've been a marketer forever. And the idea of having to figure something out in a new way to make my numbers work, to hit a certain level, obviously of awareness, but then the bottom line conversion on my website, that from a marketing perspective is a daunting task when you think of all the social platforms you've got to play on, and you've got to fight for that market share and be authentic and tick all those boxes. And it's really interesting when you can fold your real customer into the mix. And if we were to layer on, which I know we've talked about this in the past, but like Alpha, I know they're only 13, but when you look way into the future, like this is dead. I think I'm dead, but the way we think about them.
I think it's changing, right? I don't know that it's dead. I'm not ready to have a funeral for influencers.
But a different lens of them, we're always going to need influence. We always need influence, but who's doing the influencing?
Yeah.
Our traditional sense needs to be disrupted when you're looking that far ahead.
Yeah, well, I think the power of customers is that customers have authority now when the consumer's in control.
Yes.
And so it's really about understanding what, the other thing I really love is that a customer is willing to say what they don't like as much as what they do like. And an influencer is less likely to do that when they're on, and there are plenty that may do it, but they're less likely to do it authentically if they know that their paycheck is coming from the brand. Whereas a customer, one of the most interesting things that's happened since the digital revolution is that brands really have to listen to customers, because that is how they learn, and that is how they many brands have had innovations and created, new revenue streams or new audiences by listening to what their customers liked as well as what they
Yeah.
didn't like. And it's funny because I spoke to one client one day about just soliciting input, and the sort of old school OG reaction is, well, we don't want to hear what people have to say because we're afraid, that and if they don't like something, then we have to change it. And I think, if the internet has taught us anything, it's that you don't have to do everything everybody says, but you do have to listen sometimes. And I think it's especially important when you have people who are investing their money or their heart or their mind share towards a brand. And interestingly, we see in this era, there was just a report today that I wrote, or yesterday, that in the journal that I read, that said there's a lot of brand alliances and allegiances that are shifting in this period, mostly because of supply chain issues. So if you can't get your favorite brand, you're going to switch to another brand that's available. So it's even more important, I think, for brands today to have really credible, authentic people customers who know and intimately are acquainted with the products and brands to be able to speak on their behalf.
Yeah. And, I was also, obviously inflation's going up, gas prices are impacting everything. And so their cost has a big, weighs in heavily to that decision. But then how do you as a brand still capture value outside of a price war? I think that's a big challenge when we move online.
For sure.
Is there a world, and I think there is, but is there a world where there's a mix? So we've got this idea of how can you actually tap into your customers to influence other customers? If we know that is the direct line to true authenticity, you're going to know without a shadow of a doubt. I'm thinking in my mind, it's video, that you're leveraging your customer stories to influence others. I do think maybe if we look at the customer journey, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, so there's an influencer play at large on social, but then when it gets from social to the website, to the actual brand asset, is there an appetite for the shift? So you go from these micro influencers, macro influencers, to what happens on site. Do we stop influencing, or is that when the influencers potentially have a stronger role, a role?
I think influencers, if we talk about the funnel, the famous funnel, influencers are great at drawing brand awareness.
Yeah.
And I think customers are really good at driving conversion.
Yes.
Because again, there's that firsthand, I think the issue with influencers that kind of everybody knows, nobody really talks about, is, do they really use the product as much as they say they do?
Yeah.
We know they're on we know they're on the payroll. I'm sure they know how to speak to the product, but they're being paid for the number of posts. There's a high awareness, especially among younger audiences, of the business structure of these conversations. Whereas I think if you're closer to the product, say on the website, or anything that is really closer to that point of sale, I think it's the opportunity to talk to someone who, again, there is this sort of perception they don't have a financial relationship with a company, that they are either, it's just like how powerful for decades the Amazon reviews have been, right?
Yeah.
I hardly ever buy a product without, if I'm looking at sort of a generic product, I always go through the customer reviews, and
it's text reviews.
Text reviews.
Yeah.
Maybe video would be better, but I trust that these people who don't really have skin in the game are and I don't know, that could be wrong, but there is the perception that people who are going to take the time to write a review, are doing it because they believe in what they say. And I think that kind of, converting that to video and hearing people that may, share your sensibility, or share your background, or share your hair type if you're looking at a hair product. Those kinds of things are really important, because I think that the idea of customer reviews has only really just started. I think it's really, again, if you look at the reviews on Amazon, they're super helpful, but they're really very, elementary.
Yeah, it's basic.
Yeah. And so I think that, but you look at the time that people put into them and the effort. And, what I like about those reviews is you have the ability, I don't know who those people are and what their backgrounds are, but you have the ability to decide which ones are important to you, which ones you listen to. Yelp also I use for restaurant reviews. So I think the idea of, customer information is not new. I think doing it in video is more innovative.
Mm-hmm. And if we think about, I would love to just talk a little bit, and I'm a bit biased, so I'm gonna not lead you, but I wanted to just hear your opinion. But when you're looking at an influencer strategy, you are looking at media kits from influencers. What does their audience look like? How, what's their reach? What type of content do they produce? I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what it's like to work with influencers, but then also, when we jump over to their own brand assets or e-com experience, we're seeing trends of like, how do we segment, kind of like with influencers, how do you leverage real customers? Just like what you just said about, for whatever the brand is, maybe your body shape, your size, what size you wear is relevant to site visitors wanting to watch, look at other women that look like you. Maybe it's by geography, maybe it's by size type, but there's a number of different ways that you can segment that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about working with influencers and where that may be shifting to. Like right now, it's not, it's a bit of work to work with them with some constraints, but where could it possibly go potentially?
Well, I think that what you're seeing right now is, the influencer economy is mature, and there are a lot of success stories, but there are a lot of cautionary tales as well, right? And I think the challenge that we see with influencers is a brand is not in control of what they do in their real lives or what they've done in the past before the relationship started. And so there was an article in the New York Times, I think last week or the week before, about Morphe, the beauty brand that's now called Forma, that had beauty deals with Jeffree Star and James Charles. And, we all remember, or some of us remember, the dust up between James and Jeffree and Tati Westbrook. And, that was a lot of drama. But what's happened also is people have bought the products and they didn't like them. So there's the influencers who got them to actually buy, but the product they were selling was considered inferior by some customers. So there's that. Then you also have some of them who had very serious accusations of abuse and, dealing with underage with minors. And so, there's all kinds of cautionary tales about, be careful who you get involved with. And I think it's interesting to me because the reason brands get involved with influencers is to have control over the messaging, right? They know exactly who they're reaching. They know exactly how many people they're reaching each day. There's a contractual agreement to do a number of certain posts. And, it's really kind of a glorified PR move, right? Because it's really about getting that very controlled message out in a very controlled system, right? But the thing they can't control is these people are humans and they make mistakes, or they've made mistakes. And that's really a challenge because they're putting so much money and they're banking so much on this strategy. So I think, probably every company that's working with influencers is doing, they should be doing background checks and things like that. Still stuff gets through, or something could happen tomorrow. And so I think it's risky because it's staking your brand's reputation on somebody else's. Yeah. So I think it will continue. And I think for certain audiences, it will continue to be a very effective way for brands to get their message out and, certainly drive awareness and hopefully conversion. But it also, the more of them out there that are out there, the more each one gets devalued in terms of their credibility when everybody's shilling something. So I wouldn't, again, say that the role of influencers is dead. I would never say that, but I would say that who and how they're influencing is evolving.
Agreed. And as we look at TikTok, I really, you can appreciate it's a whole new twist on it.
Yeah.
which is interesting, and
Well,
how,
it's interesting because Instagram was kind of banked on their influencers having aspirational lifestyles and
Mhm.
again, the aesthetics of Instagram, which I use, Cultique uses, so it's still a very effective tool, but it was really kind of predicated on this idea of this life you could have, or this person you could look like or be like,
yes.
follow them. Whereas the whole idea behind TikTok is very different, which is this person's just like you. You could
Mhm.
be doing this. You could be singing. You could be Charlie D'Amelio. You could be having your own Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And so again, for Gen Z, that's way more relatable than,
Yeah.
especially pandemic, than, someone who's flying to different countries every week and, having luxury handbags and clothing and things like that, which, I mean, it was interesting that during the pandemic, what we saw was influencers were showing people how to scrub toilets, you know.
Yes. Crazy. Crazy.
So aspiration kind of changed in
Yeah,
the
it did.
pandemic.
You didn't believe it. Exactly. That's really interesting. Well, look, as we wrap it up, is there anything we didn't uncover with influencers that we think we should touch on?
Yeah, I think employees are the new influencers.
Oh, I love that.
I
Employees.
think that the
Yeah.
people who have decided, especially in a tight labor market where the Great Resignation
Yes.
is, a headline every day, and we know that there are way more jobs than there are people taking them, that the people who decide, yes, I'm going to commit to this company, I'm going to work there, I'm going to try to make that company a better place, maybe the world a better place, maybe my life live in a better place. That kind of commitment also speaks to a brand's values, speaks to customers, and hearing, someone's experience inside a company can even be more powerful or as powerful as a customer's experience with the product. So I think that, we're seeing a shift. And the other thing we're seeing, which is a corollary and different but related, is that we're seeing a shift of power in organizations from the C-suite to what I call the E-suite, which is
Yeah.
employees have the voice in organizations now. Employees are setting the agenda. This week Condé Nast employees just unionized, and that's a huge, huge rebuke to management, and it shows where the center of power is. So when you have employees having so much power in the workplace, they can also have a lot of power through their voices about a certain product or brand.
And it's interesting when you think of marketing's role. So tapping into both your customers and your staff, like really looking at your staff members. How do you leverage both of those camps to influence business results?
Yeah, well, I think they do different things, right? The customer is going to be the end user. The customer is going to understand really the efficacy, at the end of the day, the efficacy of the product or inefficacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The employee can talk a little bit more about the intention. And so again, aligned with values, and then it can be up to the customer to decide if the intention and the end product are aligned or not from their perspective. But even understanding, especially now when ESG is such an important part of every company, and sustainability in particular for consumers is a concern. That understanding, is this company really walking the walk or walking the talk? I never understand those phrases, but is this company really doing what they say? Because there is now pressure from culture for employees to speak out when they don't. So there is a trust level that in some ways the employee is kind of the canary in the coal mine of a brand's values.
So fascinating. It's like, what we once started with influencers, and the shift of where it's dramatically kind of moving. You've got to jump on your river raft and kind of keep with the current to keep abreast of it and to keep on top of it, to be that innovative brand.
Culture
so yeah, it's moving fast. So why don't we leave it there?
Okay.
And I might do a plug for our next LinkedIn Live. You guys can join me on April 6th. We're going to be talking to UCLA's Assistant Dean, Mr. Dylan Stafford, and he's going to be chatting with us about students, their alumni, and how they can grow their business just by tapping into their actual students. So that's it, Linda. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.